receded, when they've disappeared. And when you have a black hole in your heart, that's when, as I said it, the poison will fill the void. So yes, this is our moment. This is our opportunity to now step up and fill that void with our answer to what it means to be an American today. Right? A vision of American national identity that runs so deep that it dilutes these poisonous woke agendas to irrelevance. That is how we win. For a long time, we in the Republican Party, we have been running from something. But now is our moment to actually start running to something. To our vision of what it means to be an American. You ask people my age that question, what does it mean to be an American? You get a blank stare in response. It's like a deer in the headlights. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. What does it mean to be an American? To me, it means we believe in the ideals of the American Revolution that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. Ideals like meritocracy and the pursuit of excellence, that you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. That is why I've said we will end affirmative action in every area of American life. It has been a cancer on our national soul, and we are done with it. That is what it means to be an American. We believe in merit. To me, it means we believe in concepts like the rule of law. That if you're like my parents, you know what? They came to this country legally, through the front door. Followed the rules, paid their taxes, raised 2 kids. Both of us who went on to found successful companies that helped thousands of Americans. We should be open to immigrants like them. But it also means that your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. That is why I've said that we will use our own military to secure our own southern border in this country. And the northern border, too, if necessary. That is what it means to stand for the rule of law in the United States of America. What does it mean to be American? It means we believe in a radical dream that our founding fathers had 250 years ago. A radical dream that I have as a citizen today. That the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. Not the managerial bureaucracy and the shadow government of a deep state that actually runs the show today. So you know what, if I can't work for you all as your next president, collecting a paycheck for the taxpayer for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, by the way, then neither should any of those federal bureaucrats reporting into me either. 8-year term limits for the bureaucracy instead of civil service protections. That's how you train the swamp. And by the way, when there are government agencies that should not exist, that have become so corrupted that they have abandoned their purpose, like the FBI, or the IRS, or the ATF, or the CDC, or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the U.S. Department of Education. We're not just going to tinker around the edges. We will get in there and shut it down. That is how you revive the integrity of a constitutional republic. See, these aren't black ideas or white ideas. These aren't Democrat ideas or Republican ideas. These are fundamentally American ideals that we fought a revolution to secure in this country in 1776. A revolution that said, you know what, we the people create a government that is accountable to us, not the other way around. That we the people sort out our differences through free speech and open debate in the public square in a constitutional republic where every citizen's voice and vote counts equally. Not in the back of palace halls in old world England. Not in the back of Palace Halls in the back of BlackRock's corner office on Park Avenue in Manhattan today. Not in the back of three-letter government agency buildings in Washington, D.C. No. We, the people, create a government that is accountable to us. That's how we did it on this side of 1776, on this side of the Atlantic. And by the way, this is how we unite this country. Right? Some people think the way we're going to get to national unity is by showing up in the middle and compromising. Hold hands, sing kumbaya. Unite the country that way. No. Doesn't work that way. I think the way we're going to unite this country is by embracing the radicalism of the American ideals themselves. Let's be honest, these are radical ideas. The idea that you get to speak your mind openly as long as I get to in return. That's an extreme idea because for most of human history, it was done the other way. The idea that we, the people, could be trusted to settle a complex question like climate change or racial injustice or whatever they throw your way through free speech and open debate, culminating at the ballot box. That's a crazy idea for most of human history. But that is what makes America great. That is what makes America itself. So it is not going to be by compromising on those principles. It is going to be by being uncompromising about those principles that we reunite this country. It's not black or white. It's not red or blue. These are American ideals. And the way I look at it is, you don't hear me talking that much about Republicans and Democrats. Frankly, partisan politics mostly bores me. I think there's an establishment that pervades both parties, a managerial class that pervades every institution in this country. It's really not about Republicans and Democrats. It's about the managerial class and the citizen. It's about whether you are pro-American. Do you share these ideals in common? If you do, we're on the same team. If not, let's talk about it. That's an 80-20 split, though. That's not 50-50. That's easily 80-20 in our favor. And half the 20 are people, frankly, younger than me, who never learned those ideals in the first place. We're going to bring them along, too. That is how we're going to reignite this nation, not in some 50.1 tug-of-war election. We will, in 2024, we certainly have the opportunity to deliver a landslide election, a moral mandate, akin to what Ronald Reagan delivered in 1980. That is what my responsibility is to deliver if you all put me in that position in 2024. And I do think that's the choice we face in this GOP primary. There's other good people in this race. I respect them. I'll need some of them in positions as we revive this nation, just as I'll be relying on each of you to play your roles as we revive this country. But I do think we face a choice in this primary. Do you want incremental reform? Or do you want revolution? I stand on the side of revolution. I stand on the side of the American Revolution. I stand on the side of a revival of those 1776 ideals. Okay? That is what this choice, this moment is all about. Do you want a super PAC puppet? Do you want a patriot who speaks the truth? Do you want somebody who's grown up within the system or somebody who comes from the outside to actually disrupt it once and for all? And I'll tell you, that's the path to national unity. I grew up into a generation where we were taught to celebrate our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all of the ways we are really just the same as Americans, bound by that common set of ideals. I believe it deep in my bones that those ideals still exist. I'm running for president to revive them. You see, for me, I come from outside of politics. I'm not a politician. I could care less for inauguration speeches. I don't watch them. They bore me. I pay attention to farewell speeches because inauguration speeches are filled with unfulfilled promises. That's meaningless. The farewell speeches are interesting because that's where they tell you what they actually did. So for me, November 2024, the election, January 2025, when I take office. That's not the destination. That is the start line. The destination is January 2033. When I leave office after 2 terms, what do I want to tell you all that we actually did? My older son, Karthik, here, won't even be in high school by then, actually. He made it inside. What do I want to tell you? I want to tell you that once again in this country, we have 3 branches of government, not 4. That we shut down that unconstitutional administrative state. That we fired 75% of federal bureaucrats in the federal government. That much I know we can do. I want to tell you that we are no longer dependent on our enemy, Communist China, for our modern way of life, that we have declared independence. That much I know we can do. I want to tell you that our economy is once again growing at the fastest rate in the developed world because we embrace capitalism instead of apologizing for it. We drill, we frack, we burn coal, we embrace nuclear energy. We no longer pay people more to sit at home than we do to go to work. We embrace our exceptionalism and our growth because that is who we are. But most of all, I want to tell you, in January 2033, when I leave that office, that my 2 sons and their generation, that they are once again proud to be citizens of this nation. We have a crisis of national pride right now in the country. 16% of Gen Z says they're proud to be American. It's less than that. 60% of young Americans say that they would sooner give up their right to vote than to give up their access to TikTok. I'm not making this up. See, the problem is it's what they're taught, exactly what they're not taught. Even more so. I think that every 12th grader who graduates from high school should have to pass the same civics test that every immigrant has to pass. A few of his parents, my parents, had to pass in order to become voting citizens of this country. You've got to know something about the country, to have skin in the game, to care about that country, to be proud of that country. I believe this is possible. But the only way we're going to get there is all of us starting to speak the truth again. I understand why young people are jaded and cynical, because I was one of them. Not that long ago. I didn't care for partisan politics at 19 years old. I wasn't inspired by either of the major parties. I voted Libertarian. For years I sat it out. I grew up into a generation where our government did lie to us about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, about the basis for the 2008 financial crisis bailouts, lied to us about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax that never was, lied to us about the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic, which we know obviously came from a lab in China, despite the fact you couldn't say it, lied to us about what we knew about those vaccines before they were mandated across this country, lied to us about the Hunter Biden laptop story on the eve of an election, lied to us about that Nashville transgender shooter manifesto, lied to us about what's really happening and how our money's being spent abroad in Ukraine and elsewhere. As we speak today, we have a government that has systematically withheld the truth from the people because they believe we can't handle the truth. Well, if there's one thing I will deliver as your next president, we will deliver a government that once again just tells the truth to the people. We the people, we can handle the truth. We demand the truth. We require a government that once again tells us the truth. And the only way we're going to get there is all of us not just waiting for the government to do it. All of us starting to do it in our own lives. It's a lot easier to point at the government. It's a lot harder to take a long, hard look in that mirror. That's what we're doing in this campaign. Speak the truth, not just when it is easy, but when it is hard. Say in public what you will say in private at the dinner table. Speak the truth and speak it without apology. That's what we're doing tonight. God is real. There are 2 genders. Fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is not a border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. Capitalism is the best system known to lift us up from poverty. There are 3 branches of government, not 4. And the U.S. Constitution is the strongest guarantor of freedom in human history. That is the truth. We fight for the truth. We stand up for the truth. That is what won us the American Revolution. That is what will win us the revolution of 2024. Thank you for coming out tonight. May God bless you and your families. May God bless our United States of America. Thank you all. I appreciate you. We are just getting started in this journey. We will not stop until we see this through and revive our national soul. Remember who we are as Americans, and don't you once let them make you apologize for it. Thank you. We're just getting warmed up. We're going to open this up. We're going to have a conversation. I'm excited to hear from all of you. Fear not. Open up. Take that filter off, and we're going to do this tonight. So raise your hands, and we'll bring you the microphone. See one up here, and then we'll go to the back there.
Hey Vivek, my name is Alex. It's great to be here. Just 2 quick questions. One, I read your article in the American Conservative about your foreign
thank
policy,
you for reading that.
And I was excited to come here tonight because I know that you're going to actually get into details. And one of the things you wrote about was the revival of the new Monroe Doctrine under your presidency.
That's right.
And you wanted to incentivize Latin American countries to work with the U.S. as opposed to the current fact pattern on the ground in Nicaragua, Brazil, with the Chinese investment. How are you going to do that? What are the specifics? And the second one is a more inspirational question. I read a lot of your content. I see what you say. And you talk about living your life, right? And there's all these people who are just mischaracterizing or frankly just not even engaging with what you're saying. How do you deal with every day just so much negativity? And I follow what people write about you, all the op-eds, Politico, as well as on social media. How do you deal with that on a daily basis, the constant negativity and outpouring of negativity? How do you find the energy to do what you do? So sorry, that's 2 long questions.
No, that's 2 big questions. I mean, those are not small questions. Those are big questions. Well, look, I'll answer the second one actually first. Let me call Apurva up to the stage for a second, because this is a big part of the reason how I'm able to handle it. Is we have a family unit in this country, and in this that's part of our national tradition that I enjoy is in our family. And Apurva's the hero in our family. She actually, sometimes I'll come home after a difficult day, or after a difficult few days where you don't get many nights at home, but she'll tell me about doing 12 cases in the OR of throat surgery, of people whose lives were hanging in the balance. And for me, it actually, there's something about that that gives me strength too, because you can be in this world of presidential politics, get wrapped up in, what's happening on, CNN or social media or whatever on a given day, and then just take a step back and say, you know what, I might not even have the most important job in this household. And I think that there's something about that we, I think, help each other be the best version of ourselves, and Apurva's a big part of my ticket of how I'm able to do that. So she's the one who has to go through this a lot too, because there's a lot of falsehood you read, but it's part of what we signed up for, but maybe give you guys a chance to hear from her a little bit too.
And thank you for that question, because it is, bless my husband, it doesn't bother him. Since I'm, the first company he's founded, or second officially, Roybant, he went up against pharmaceutical industries. No one, who here thinks they run well? No, not a single hand for the record. And he started his first company basically going up against him and saying, as a 28-year-old, I don't think you're doing a good job. You're not developing the right drugs. You're taking too long, and it's way too expensive. I'm going to do it better. And surprise, surprise, the pharmaceutical companies did not like that message. And they came out of just a few months after we got married. They came out with all of these terrible articles about how this 28-year-old kid, a decade ago exactly now, who does he think he is? Coming out against, and especially his first drug was an Alzheimer's drug, and you might have heard about it. And unfortunately, this was not a drug that was, we thought was promising. I have had many members of my family have died from Parkinson's. Vivek's mother was a geriatric psychiatrist. She treated Alzheimer's patients. And he looked at this drug and thought, this might be something that can actually help people. And they ran an amazing trial. They answered actual scientific questions that were open, and unfortunately, it failed. And guess who was so happy? The pharmaceutical industry. And they had so many victory laps. But they didn't have as many victory laps when he got 5 more drugs approved at a much higher rate than any of them do, and than any other pharmaceutical company does. So, yes, it's hard. It's hard for me because I love this man, and to see how he has been characterized over the past few weeks is difficult. But that's what I'm grateful for this process for. And for you wonderful New Hampshire people for coming out on a Sunday night to listen to him. Because on the debate stage, you saw the warrior, and he can fight. And he'll give it to whoever he can give as well as he gets. But he's so much more than that. This man, he loves this country. He cares so much about it. He cares about the principles. And I'm so grateful to you for coming out here to really hear his vision. And please spread the word. It makes such a big difference. And thank you so much for engaging so much in this democratic process. I'm so grateful to you. And this is what makes it worthwhile for me, just getting to meet you all. Thank you so much.
The truth is, when you're guided by your sense of purpose, nothing's going to stop you. And whatever we're going through in this campaign is going to be a tiny fraction of what it's going to be when we're taking on that federal administrative state. Right? So if you're not prepared to sit across the table from NBC News or college kids on college campuses or the mainstream media or whatever, you're not prepared to sit across the table from Xi Jinping. And so this process exists for a reason. And we're going through it because, this isn't supposed to be easy. This is supposed to select for the next person who's going to have the spine and fortitude to lead our national revival. And that's what I'm bringing to the table. Now, as it relates to the question on foreign policy, we published a broad vision of a totally new vision of our foreign policy, which is to say we will protect the homeland first. That's the first thing. We have cyber, missile defense, even super EMP, electromagnetic pulse defense. They could wipe out the electric grid in a matter of days if you actually had electromagnetic pulses across this country. That's the first job of the military and the commander-in-chief, is to actually defend the homeland, something we've forgotten. The second principle is to go one layer further than that. A modern Monroe Doctrine, which says you don't mess with the United States in the Western Hemisphere. If you're Russia, China, it doesn't matter. So get that Chinese spy balloon out of our sky. Get that Chinese spy base out of Cuba. Get that Chinese-made fentanyl out of the hands of the 80,000 plus people who were slated to die of fentanyl poisoning from fentanyl crossing the southern border this year. Right? That's a big part of what the modern Monroe Doctrine means. But it also means we don't want Chinese ownership of the Panama Canal. Many of you may not have heard of that. That's actually a big problem, is Chinese control over ports in the Panama Canal is a problem right now. And so yes, I've said that, we need to engage in bilateral relationships, not this multilateral climate change-ridden nonsense, but bilateral trade relationships with partners around the world, including in Latin America, to assert ourselves strongly enough to say we don't want China in our backyard. We're done with that. And then I get one layer further where I don't want us to fight foreign wars that don't advance our interests. I don't want to send our sons and daughters anymore to die to fight somebody else's war. I don't want to sleepwalk our way into World War III, which is what I believe the current president, with aiding and abetting of the Republican Party, is potentially on our way to doing right now as we speak. I want peace in Ukraine, have a very clear vision of a peace deal that gets us there. One that would require Russia to exit its military alliance with China. China is actually our top threat today. Reduce our economic dependence on China, eventually declare independence economically entirely. And by the way, this is how we deter China from going after Taiwan while avoiding World War III. So I published this in the American Conservative. It's long, But those of you who want to dive in and get the details, you can do that. If I get more questions on foreign policy, I'm happy to address it too. But I do think that thinking about that concentric circle model kind of gives you a sense of how I view the world, right? Family is important to me. We take care of the family first. I think that every person in this country, their first allegiance should be to their family. Secondly, you know what? We're going to take care of this country. Okay, when you've taken care of your family, the people who surround your family, taken care of your fellow citizens, not just in New Hampshire, not just in Ohio, but from the south side of Chicago to Kensington in the middle of the inner city of Philadelphia, both places I've gone in this campaign, to West Maui, where I've talked to residents. I haven't talked to Zelensky, but I have talked to people who live in West Maui. Yes, put the interests of Americans first, then we can talk about what we're going to do to foreign aid programs in sub-Saharan Africa or wherever else. But I do believe that our foreign policy should prioritize protecting the interests of our own citizens first. And that revives a little bit of Richard Nixon. It rejects much of the consensus in both establishment parties today. And I think it's a very different worldview for where we're going in a way that I think is going to both keep us out of war while also ensuring American prosperity here at home. And that's probably the most important piece that differentiates me from the rest of the GOP field. We all agree that, and for good reason, that men shouldn't be competing with women in swimming competitions. That's great. We all agree on that, and that's a good thing. But we got to see what actually separates the next generation from the past. And I think it's going to be how we assert ourselves while avoiding wars. And I think that's something I'm uniquely positioned to do as the true outsider in this race. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll go to the back. I saw you put your hand up, and then we'll just move it around the room.
Hi, my name's Mark Dekoff. I'd like to thank you for stepping up to run for president and putting your family out under the microscope. I'm retired out of the New Hampshire National Guard. My question is you say you're going to use the military on the border. Are you talking federal troops or are you talking National Guard? Because I don't think you can use federal troops on our country without martial law.
Yes, a great question. First of all, thank you for your service in the National Guard as well. I appreciate that, sir. What's your name? Good to see you. So, this is why I love New Hampshire, first of all. You guys get right into the details, and I appreciate that. And that's what we need. We trust you as a country. We have traditions for a reason. We're not just going to wake up on one morning and say, oh, we'll just change the tradition. No, you guys are trained to, with no social media algorithms in the air, no TV screens between us. I think you guys understand how to be able to dive deep into substance. So the law you're referring to is a law called Posse Comitatus. It was passed in the aftermath of the Civil War during the Reconstruction era that says the U.S. military cannot be used to carry out traditional law enforcement functions for good reason. So now we get into a debate about what is a traditional law enforcement function. There's two questions here. One is just because something is a law enforcement function doesn't mean that it can't also be a function for the military if it relates to a foreign threat. The second point is if you're using the military only at the border, I'm not talking about sanctuary cities or otherwise, if you're using the military only at the border and they're outward facing to a foreign threat, keep in mind those videos we saw 2 weeks ago of armed cartel gunmen coming across our own border. If we can use our own military to protect an invasion across somebody else's border, yes, we can use our own military to protect against an invasion, and that's what it is, across our own southern border too, on strong legal and constitutional authority. So I'm a constitutional absolutist, but when you're talking about on the border versus inside the border, outward facing versus a foreign threat versus not, that's why we're on strong legal footing. So it's an outstanding question. I've gone deep with the legal scholars on this issue so that I could say with conviction that if necessary, we have the option of using either the National Guard or the U.S. military to defend against the invasion on our own southern border under the circumstances that we find ourselves today. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it and respect it. Thank you very much. We'll come right here.
Hi, my name is James Sebo. I'm from Franklin. I'm actually the chairman of the New Hampshire Legislative Youth Advisory Council.
Awesome. Thank you, man. Bring young people into our movement.
So I have a couple of questions. One, Obviously the Department of Education doesn't actually benefit any of our schools.
Yes.
So how would we help inner city schools and
Yes.
Underfunded schools to have students achieve greatness? And then what advice do you have for a student like me who wants to get more involved with government and make a bigger impact on our state and on our country?
I appreciate that. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
17.
You're 17.
And I'm going to be able to vote in the primary.
Give this man a round of applause. I love that. Look at that engagement. You don't have, I'm so proud of you for doing what you're doing. My number one piece of advice to you, whether it's to have an impact in government or, and I love seeing other young people too in the audience tonight, it's to, whether it's in business, whether it's through making a change in the private sector or even within government, when the pack is running over here, check out what's going on over here, okay? And so the two keys to driving success through impact and even success for yourself is to be contrarian and to be right. There's no point in being right if everybody else is doing the same thing. In some ways, I was actually just making even a reference to that earlier. Okay, we're all against men's competing against women in women's sports competitions. Great, we got that settled, but that doesn't separate us for hard decisions we need to make, say in a GOP primary. Well, that presents itself every time. And what Apoorva described, the medicines that I developed were the medicines that pharma had abandoned because of soft coordinated behavior in deciding certain areas deserve not future development. So, and I built a multi-billion-dollar company in the process. But even in solving problems in the government, look, there'll be the things that everybody else is talking about. But you have to look at skating to where the puck is going by finding what's true. Now you got to be right about that. So usually, I mean, the crowd goes in the direction for a certain reason. So there's no point in being right if everybody else is going in that direction. There's no point in being contrarian if you're wrong. But you have to both buck the trend, but also do it with conviction where you know that you are right. You have found an opportunity to solve a problem that the other people, regardless of partisan orthodoxy, have, for whatever reason, missed. That would be my advice to you. Now, as it relates to your question on the educational system, in some ways, I'm going to try to follow that advice. Right? We have great activism in the last couple of years, and I'm glad for this, of parents showing up at school board meetings to be able to get a lot of this toxic poison, racial and gender ideologies, etc., that resemble religious cults more than they do educational content out of the public schools. But here's the truth. They're responding to the incentives quietly created for them by the federal government. Because the U.S. Department of Education tells these schools, you don't get our money unless you adopt these toxic racial and gender ideologies. So I say kill the head of the snake. Shut down the U.S. Department of Education. Give that $80 billion and put it in the hands of parents, including in the inner cities, across this country, to allow them, empower them to send their kids to whatever that best possible school is, rather than being trapped in this ghetto known as their zip code. I think educational mobility is the civil rights issue of our time, actually. They'd rather say that math is racist than to actually acknowledge that it might just be inequitable just to tell poor kids in the inner city they can't learn math for 2 years during a COVID-19 pandemic where the teachers' unions negotiate a holiday, when people who can afford to go to better schools somehow continue to get an education during those years. That's inequitable. I don't know if you call that systemic racism, but you call it a problem. Math isn't racist. That's woke smoke that's being used to deflect accountability for their actual failure. So then you have educational mobility. And look, since you guys are New Hampshire, you like the technical details, I'll go one layer more detailed on this one. Here's the dirty little secret. The schools that spend the most money per student are the ones that deliver the poorest results on a per student basis. So that means if the parents switching their kids to the better school, they're likely moving to a school with actual better outcomes, but also cheaper per student. So I think they should be able to take some of that money with them. So we'll go through some math here. These are actual numbers in New York. New York City, bad schools are spending $40,000 per student per year. There are good schools spending $15,000 per student per year. That's a $25,000 difference. So if the parent now has mobility because they got actual economic mobility shutting down the Department of Education, we've closed the gap of underfunded school choice to switch to the better school. Well, if they get to take in the kid's account half that difference, the $25,000 difference, let's say they just take half of that with them, that kid is going to graduate with a $250,000 graduation gift if that's invested even in basic terms. It's not even close. What's a better use of that money? That kid gets a head start on the American dream. We starve the bureaucracy in the failing public school that forces it to get itself into action. End the teachers' unions. That's actually how the public schools will start to compete. The number one constraint for public schools that don't apply to private and charter schools are the teachers' unions. End them. And my view is, let's bring some transparency in. If you're going to teach it in the classroom, put it on the internet. If you don't want to put it on the internet, you shouldn't be teaching it in the classroom. And then against that backdrop, let's have some civic education in this country. That's how we make education about the achievement of our students rather than employment opportunities for a bureaucracy. So hopefully that gives you a sense for how we're thinking about educational reform in this country. That's something I'm confident we'll be able to get done in my first term, and is also a good example of why we can't just be incremental about this. As many of you know, I respect the heck out of Donald Trump for the job he did for this country in his 4 years in office. But I'm not just going to put Betsy DeVos or a good person like her on top and say, hey, reform this. We've got to take the quantum leap. You can't reform that beast because the DOE, the Department of Education, is now spending more money than it ever did. Both Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump are long gone. We have to get in there and shut it down. That's how you actually revive the lifeblood of a constitutional republic and revive an economy while we're at it too. Thanks for that question, brother. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Good evening. Thank you for coming to New Hampshire. My name is Peter, live up in Sandwich, New Hampshire. Quick question, I'd just like to address a little bit about Social Security, and in particular, its pending solvency, insolvency, depending on where we're going with this. And I'm just wondering, as part of maybe some reform, do you see room for private accounts?
Yes, is the short answer to that.
Okay, great.
Absolutely has to be part of the answer. If you don't learn from your past mistakes, you're doomed to make worse mistakes in the future. So here's one that we can learn from. It wasn't that long ago when we had a Social Security surplus in this country. And you know what? If we had just allowed that money to be invested in the same way that any sensible financial advisor would tell you to invest your own money in a diversified portfolio, we would have a giant surplus today. We'd be swimming in excess money. But we had cumbersome regulations that said we don't do that for Social Security. That Republicans and Democrats both agreed on, by the way, which is a shame. So we don't have a surplus now, which is a shame because we have nothing to invest. But the next time we get there, we can actually learn from that mistake of the past and get it right next time around. There's all kinds of quirks that are actually broken in Social Security. I'll give you one example. Working seniors above a certain age, many people want to continue to work, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to collect their Social Security. Unfortunately, you only get 2 cents for every additional dollar you earn. That doesn't make any sense. Especially at a time when we have twice as many jobs in this country as we do have human beings. So we're disincentivizing work, we're penalizing seniors who want to continue with part-time work or whatever, but then make them choose between Social Security and working. This is a broken system. So I think in the very near term, we have deep trust issues in this country. My number one message is no cuts to Social Security or Medicare for existing seniors. Let's focus instead on delivering economic growth, GDP growth in this country. Let's not make cuts when we're on our back foot. Let's actually get on our front foot instead. Unlock American energy, put people back to work, stabilize the dollar as a unit of measurement. I would peg the dollar to a basket of hard commodities, including gold, silver, nickel. We could talk about a broader basket. Rescind a majority of federal regulations that act like a wet blanket on the U.S. economy. And I have the constitutional authority to do it because of West Virginia versus EPA last year, which was the most important Supreme Court case of our lifetime. This actually gets us back, I think, to 4, maybe 5+% GDP growth within a few years. And then we can, first of all, grow our way out of some of our problems right there. Our debt to GDP ratio automatically improves if our GDP growth improves. But then we also have the trust to say, okay, for the next generation, maybe we want to do this a little differently, where we allow people to actually invest so their Social Security account can compound itself over a 40-year period so that we never find ourselves in this mess again. And that gives you a sense for, on that one issue, that's an answer, but it also gives you a sense for how I want to lead this country more generally. Right? The traditional party structure will give you two choices: raise taxes or cut benefits. There's a third and better way: GDP growth. Right? The worst ideas in Washington are often bipartisan ones. And I think that we have to be able to think outside of those partisan shackles to say, what is the third way that we say we don't have to be in decline? We might just yet be on our way up. And so we might as well start acting like it. That's the way I'm going to lead this country, from Social Security to Medicare to any of the other economic challenges we face. We can grow our way out of more of our problems if we have the courage to actually open our mind and open our heart and open our policy to actually just doing it. Thank you. I appreciate that, Peter. Thank you.
I have a two-part question.
Hey, what's your name?
I'm Jefferson.
Jefferson, and I love your shirt.
Thank you.
I think I met you coming in. I love your name too.
Thanks. So first, you said you would ban social media for anyone under 16. How would you implement that? And also, would you consider YouTube? Because that has loads of educational content, and I've learned absolutely tons from YouTube.
That's good. We don't want to take that from you. I think that, so look, so my position on this is very narrowly crafted here. I think that if you can't smoke an addictive cigarette by the age of 18 or 21, if you can't have an addictive drink of alcohol by the age of 21, I think that a 13 or a 14-year-old should not be using an addictive, algorithmically powered social media product until the age of 15 or 16 either. And I think that's the only consistent way we can go. How do you enforce it? The same way we do it for cigarettes, actually. Put the liability on the manufacturers. They're going to be able to do that, right? They know, if they want to know how old the person is using it in the modern era, they can know how old that person is. But the question is, do we actually have the spine to draw that line? I'm actually I'm a pro-freedom person, right? I want people to be able to make whatever choices they want to make. And part of freedom means you're free to make the wrong choice as an adult. But adults aren't the same as kids. And I think that that's why we've got to wake up. I take the same position on gender-affirming care, right? If you're an adult, you're a guy, you want to wear a skirt, I'm not going to stop you. We live in a free country. But we're not going to let kids go through genital mutilation or chemical castration before the age of 18. Kids aren't the same as adults. We have to protect kids in this country. And that's also the place where, you know, when we think about the increased concerns about child trafficking, child sex trafficking, and otherwise, the number one place where they do it, where they meet their perpetrators, social media. Number one place where kids are now getting fentanyl. They don't know they're getting fentanyl. I met Derek and Kathy in Iowa. They had a son, Sebastian, 16 years old. Might have been 17 years old. Bought what he thought was Percocet via Snapchat. Turned out it was laced with fentanyl. That's not even an overdose, that's poison. If you put it in a Big Mac, they wouldn't call it an overdose. It's closer to bioterrorism. So I think that we have to draw a hard line between kids and adults, but it's a narrow scope of what fits that description of interactive, algorithmically powered social media. And I think that's the narrow scope that I would draw the line for kids under the age of 16. Without taking away some of the educational value that we're going to be able to deliver you. It's not through computer screens or automatically the enemy. It's really the way in which it's been algorithmically designed to be addictive and to be potentially predatory for kids under a certain age. And then once you're an adult, you're going to be better equipped to be able to use that. Thank you, Jefferson. Great question, and I appreciate it. And I love your question. And then we'll come up here.
Hi, I'm Meredith. We have a water crisis problem in this country, and particularly in Flint, Michigan. I promised I would ask this for someone very dear to me, and I want to know if you've been there and seen. They will tell you they're not okay. They're still not okay, and the lead levels are at a point where it's right under where the government can get involved. They are so impoverished that they need help, and they want filtration in their homes. And I was wondering if you have any plans to help those people, please.
So the answer to that question has to be yes. Like, it just has to be yes for the next president. I mean, it's the same answer as Maui. Right? When it comes to people in this country, somehow you're left to fend for yourself. I was looking at Portman. She grew up in Michigan. I grew up in Ohio. We're very familiar with what happened in Flint. I grew up in Ohio. We live in central Ohio today. We see what happened in East Palestine. See what happens in Maui. When it comes to a catastrophe in this country, somehow we engage in self-loathing and say it doesn't matter unless it has to do with climate change. And this is really my objection to the climate cult in this country. I'm an environmentalist. I stand for clean air and clean water and a beautiful country that we preserve as a beautiful nation for our national parks and otherwise, let alone for the safety of our own citizens. And so when I say we're going to abandon the climate cult, and I mean it, we're done measuring carbon emissions, we're done mandating the measurement of carbon emissions, we're going to focus on what actually creates and drives human prosperity. That redirects the focus of an EPA that will be downsized by 75% under my watch, to have the remaining 25% to actually focus on what does impact the lives of everyday Americans. From Flint to Maui to Chicago to Kensington. And so I don't have the technical answers for you today about what we're going to do to fix that problem in Flint. But I don't care if you're from Vivek Ramaswamy to Michael Moore. We might share different views on a lot of things, but we agree that we have to take care of our own people right here at home a lot better than we have. That's the top job of an actual government, rather than to take care of imaginary problems halfway around the world or non-existent problems at a global scale while flogging ourselves here in this country. And so getting to the bottom of that, you bet we do. Getting to the bottom of our timber policies in this country that have stopped the natural occurrence of limited scope fires and instead get large-scale ones instead in the name of environmentalism. We're done with that. Indigenous water rights that stop us from putting out a fire long before we could have actually prevented catastrophic deaths of children. We're done with that. Abandon the cults that stop us from actually solving the real problems. And you have my commitment that if I'm the US president, the same way we're speaking the truth and getting to the bottom of everything else I named, yes, getting to the bottom of what really happened in Flint, holding people accountable for that. There can be no reconciliation without truth and accountability, but then our path forward, more importantly, to make sure we've protected people from East Palestine to Flint, you have my commitment that that's where my focus will be as US president, not somewhere halfway around the world that doesn't advance American interests. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Tell your friends that I said so. You don't take two more questions.
Hello, my name is Mark West and I live in Meredith, New Hampshire, retired up here from Massachusetts. You know, as I look at these 10 issues here, I'm in agreement with them. They're great. But if we were to probably ask the Democrats what were their top 10 issues, I don't think we'd see the same 10 issues. We'd see a number of other things that they're saying are the biggest issues facing the United States and America and our way of life. Could you talk a little bit about how you will, when you get to that stage of debating the Democratic candidate, and they presenting their issues, how you will be able to enlighten them, convince them that their issues will be handled by this without alienating them, you know, and turning them off and turning off part of America by saying, or being dismissive of their issues. How will you fit those into here? Because these are the issues, I think, that need attention.
Thank you, and I respect that question. I want to say two things in response to that. One is I think much of the division actually is artificial. So I could see how you'd arrive at that opinion by watching the media or consuming social media. I've traveled this country. I've been to most states in this country at this point in the last couple of years between my book tours and this campaign. I think much of the division's made up. Right? If you take off the partisan filters and you just say, take the values I talked about at the beginning. Meritocracy, the pursuit of excellence, free speech, self-governance over aristocracy. I think most of us share these values in common. I think most of us in this room do. You're presumably here because you like some of what I've been saying. But I'll go a step further. I think most of you believe that your neighbors and your colleagues and your classmates and the parents of your kids' classmates share these basic values in common too. Maybe we disagree about corporate tax rates, should they be high or low? Those are details, and we'll disagree on the details. But when it comes to the most fundamental values, I just think it's true that most of us share the basic rules of the road in common. And I think we have to call the bluff on that division. I think we have to liberate much of the Democratic Party from the shackles they themselves are held in by a tyranny of the minority. It's not a tyranny of the majority, it's a tyranny of the fringe minority that has managed to swallow an entire party whole. And it might just take, I wouldn't say a Republican, but maybe an independent patriot who speaks the truth to deliver the Emancipation Proclamation for the Democrat Party of the modern era. And this is how we deliver a landslide election in this country. That's why I show up. I like to practice what I preach. I don't like to preach about free speech to roomfuls of people who agree with me. Talked to Al Sharpton yesterday, talked to George Stephanopoulos today. He would be the judge of whether they conducted fair interviews or not, but I don't care. I'll still show up. I'll keep showing up. We got to practice what we preach. And then I think what we have going for at least the way we do this here in this campaign is facts. Let's take that last issue of climate change, right? That's one of the big divides. Huge divides, right? It's affecting our modern way of life. It's changing the way we do it. So let's talk about some facts. Over the last century, there's a 98% reduction in climate disaster-related deaths. Nobody's going to dispute that fact. That is a hard fact, hard arithmetic. In fact, I said it a few days ago. They came back with a fact check with the numbers, and I said, yes, literally do the math compared to 1920. It's literally a 98% reduction. Why? Because of more plentiful access to fossil fuels. The Earth is more green surface area covered today than it has been over the last century. Why? Because carbon dioxide is plant food. We're at an all-time or close to a relative low of carbon dioxide as a percentage of the Earth's atmosphere when you look at the full history of the Earth, actually, for as long as the Earth's existed. That's an interesting fact you don't hear. Then you think about 8 times as many people dying of cold temperatures rather than warm ones. And the right answer to all temperature-related deaths being more plentiful, abundant access to fossil fuels. These are hard facts. Then you look at the mystery of the fact that, okay, the people who are opposed to carbon emissions here in the United States, you say you're concerned about global warming. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's see what's happening with those carbon emissions. They're being shifted to places like China. Well, that didn't do us much good for global warming, did it? Now let's double click on that. So, we got these 10 things going. Well, the 6th commandment of the climate cult, which I happen to have studied well, I don't subscribe to it, but you got to know what you're up against, is that methane leakage is 80 times worse for global warming than a unit of carbon dioxide, a unit of methane to a unit of carbon dioxide. Methane leakage is actually worse in China for producing the same unit of oil than it is in the United States. So not only is it that you shifted the same carbon emissions to China, it's even worse, even if you subscribe to the climate religion on its own terms, because methane leakage is worse over there. So that's you can have both those beliefs at the same time. And then you say, okay, wait, the people who are most strongly opposed to carbon emissions in the US are also the ones right now who are most opposed to the greatest form of carbon-free energy production known to mankind, that's nuclear energy. And hydroelectric energy while we're at it too. Which says there's something else going on here, right? It's not even about the climate. The climate agenda has nothing to do with the climate. It has to do with global equity, specifically China catching up to the United States, which is why they're laughing at every step of the way. China has a word for this. They have a word for us, or not me, but I'll tell you in a second for many of you in this room. Baitsuo. It literally refers to woke white people, progressive white people in the United States, who are foolish in their self-criticism. And they use it to laugh at us, right? So, I think facts are useful. I think knowing those facts are useful. I think if you see other leaders in the Republican Party laying that out in the same way that I just did, let me know, because I want them on our side and part of this movement too. Part of my reason for being in this race is I saw that vacuum. And I think that's what we're going to need in order to reunite this country. We can't just be reciting partisan hack talking points handed up to us by some super PAC puppet master in a binder that we read criticizing Joe Biden 3 to 5 times per speech. And I'm not making that up. That's literally like in the coaching documents that super PACs have handed to their candidates in this race. That doesn't work for us. That's another path to a red trickle rather than a red wave. That doesn't move people. This cannot be a 50.1 election. This has to be a moral mandate, a landslide. And hopefully that at least gives you some sense for how I will approach that debate stage when I'm facing off against, not Joe Biden, they're not going to let him run against me, but whichever other person they put up in his place. That's how we're going to bring most of their people even along with us. Not because they agree with me on everything, but because they'll know that at least I mean what I say 100% of the time, and we still are moving towards a vision for this country. Maybe last question up here for, you guys pick. we'll take both of you. Okay, thank you.
My name is Sergeant Oscar Toast, retired Army.
Thank you.
Something that's been bothering me is that people that go to Congress or the Senate, they're there for 2 years, they get their lifelong stuff, while military who serves more than 20 years, or even the reserve components. If you're a reserve component, you have to wait until you're 60 years of age. Why these people in Congress are getting theirs 2 years or 6 years after they retire or get voted out of office. What would you do to curb that? Because I don't think that's right for the American soldier or sailor or anybody that served this country. You gotta wait until you're 60 or you're dead and your family gets left out in the cold. But these people get everything under the sun, including security. And one more, for the school systems. We see a lot of mass shootings. I'm a pro-Second Amendment person, you know, and what would you do, you know, would you want to see former military personnel to be able to sit there and guard our children, and my kids are grown up, but my friend here, who's got kids, and a lot of people here who have children in school that are defenseless because of these policies that they have, and you have no guns around the school system or any place. How do you feel about these gun-free zones, and what would you do to curb it to stop these mass shooters?
I appreciate that. What's your name?
My name's Oscar.
And where did you serve?
I'm a Cold War veteran. I served in Germany two tours,
Thank you.
I did 24 years.
Thank you for your service, sir. So I love the way you framed that, because it gives me an idea. It's one of the things I love these events. I can't tell you that I had thought about it the way that you had, but it was very clean. If you're going to have a perk for Congress, it better darn well be a perk for every person who has served this country on the front lines in the military and any capacity. I love that. We just made some policy on this campaign. Right, we'll implement that, but that's a principle and a good North Star for our policy. Even when it comes to the quality of health care you get. I think in the Cadillac health plans, look what the VA system is doing for our veterans. It's pathetic.
Yes.
Losses of continuity in care resulting in, they say it's 22, on my research it's closer to 40 veterans per day ending up in suicide, rather than actually having people who are able to take care of them through a broken VA system. And I think young people are smart to this. They're not stupid. Why do we have a 25% recruitment deficit in our U.S. military? Part of the reason why is this is how you treat veterans on the back end. You tell me I'm going to put my life on the line for that? No, thank you. Right? So I think that these things go together. The revival of national pride involves standing up for Americans, especially those who have made the true sacrifice for this country. And I thank you for contributing. You're going to, I can guarantee you will hear me saying this on the campaign trail. So the first time, tell me your name again, because I want to.
My name's
Oscar, okay. I'm going to have to confess a bad politician habit to you. So first of all, I'll say, Oscar told me, Oscar in New Hampshire told me this. Then I'll say, you know, I've heard it said, and I say, as I've always said, those benefits that Congress gets out of go to every person in the military. So I'll apologize in advance because, you know, but just joking around. I think that it's actually a brilliant idea, and it's a great framing for this issue. Now, on the issue of guns, but school shootings, I'm a Second Amendment absolutist like you. Like you, I'm a father of children who, mine are younger, we still have to think about their safety when sending them to a school. That's unconscionable. So I do think that just talk about the Department of Education, for less than 25% of that budget, we could put 3 armed security guards in every school across this country. It's not even close, which is a better use of funds. And so I think that that's one of the ways we want to protect our children. Let's actually protect our children.
Support arming teachers?
I don't necessarily support arming teachers out of the gate. I think it should be professional armed security guards in the schools. That's where I'm at on that question. Now, I think that you want to deal with the spike in violent crime in this country. And we'll just go to him for the last one. Yep. Spike in violent crime in this country. Here's how you do it. The question is, do we have the spine to do it? Police officers allowed to do their jobs without looking over their shoulder for fear of being sued. And then bring back mental health institutions in this country because we have a mental health epidemic. And we're going to have the courage to confront. That's not politically correct. And there were abuses in the past, and we should correct for those. But that's a taboo topic you're not supposed to touch. But I would sooner remove psychiatrically ill, demonstrably dangerous people from their community than to remove guns from law-abiding citizens. That's how we do it. Thank you for that. Last question. We'll get the last word.
So I would like to welcome you to my home.
Is this your home?
I'm a
Hometown?
Laconian native.
Amazing. It's so beautiful here.
This campaign, I couldn't be happier to be a part of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So there's a lot of pushback on your proposal to end the war with Russia and Ukraine. Yeah. So when your proposal is implemented, what is your plan to make sure that the people of the Donbass region and anywhere else that's in the line that would be a part of that deal, how do you keep Putin and his army from going in there and just wiping everybody out?
So I'm pulling my phone up for a reason. I'm going to do something I've never done at a campaign event before, but I think that we need to start lifting the curtain on the political process, okay? So I'm going to read to you a text message from a billionaire who is a known mega donor who sent me a text. He's a guy who likes me, likes most of my policies. I'm literally reading this word for word. It was like a long criticism of my Ukraine policy. I could read the whole thing, but this is going to be really long. But I'll read you the last text message on this. Okay. We should not abandon Ukraine. The country wants a mature and thoughtful leader that will keep us and the world safe. They don't want a renegade. Your youth and lack of experience will become an even bigger issue when you get foreign policy wrong. It makes people question whether you should be in charge of the nuclear codes. You have made progress, but your candidacy is looking risky. There's growing concern amongst Republicans. Lastly, I suggest, then he did a few minutes later, I suggest you revisit your policy on Ukraine. It would be very powerful if you admitted that you made a mistake, that you studied the issue and came up with a better plan. Many call you arrogant. This would help correct that. So it's just, I'm just lifting the curtain a little bit. There's tremendous pressure on me to change my position on Ukraine. But I didn't arrive at my position because I hadn't studied it enough. I arrived at my position because I have studied it. And I believe that there's a better way than the bipartisan establishment in both parties is actually feeding us. So here's my concern. The top threat that we face right now is communist China. The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest military threat that we face today. And we are actively driving Russia further into China's hands because we're arming Ukraine to the teeth. I believe in honoring our commitments. I want to be very clear about this. We can't just leave our commitments willy-nilly, that we don't stand by them. We do. But the 1994 Budapest Memorandum they bring up often. We have fulfilled our commitments pursuant to the 1994 Budapest Memorandum to Ukraine. What you don't hear about, I was tussling with a reporter on the bus a little bit before about this, kind of scolding the media for this, but she says that they're doing fine, but I disagree. You don't hear this from the media. The 1990 commitment that James Baker made, our Secretary of State, made to Gorbachev, it was called the not 1 inch commitment, that we would move NATO not 1 inch past East Germany. And yet here we are, NATO's expanded more after the fall of the USSR than it ever did when the USSR ever existed. So what I think is we have an opportunity to end this war. And by the way, the one thing Putin asked for And Putin's, you know, his behavior here has been craven, so this is not forgiving any of his behavior or saying that I trust Putin. I don't. I'll get back to this. I trust him to follow his self-interest, but I don't trust him inherently. But the one thing that Putin did ask for before invading Ukraine was a hard commitment that NATO not admit Ukraine. This was a commitment that James Baker made to Gorbachev in 1990. Just like you hear the media tell you about the Budapest Memorandum, you don't hear a peep about that. So here's what I think. Let's get very practical. First of all, we should be energy independent in this country. Okay, if we were energy independent, Putin would have never invaded Ukraine. Because he knows we rely on him. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two, keep your commitments. Do a deal that ends this war. Here's the deal. We'll freeze the current lines of control. Ukraine comes out with its sovereignty intact, which is better than the path they might otherwise be on, by the way. Make a hard commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. But in return, we get something much bigger. Russia has to exit its military partnership with China. They're in a treaty. Get out of that treaty. We will reopen economic relations with Russia. We will further require that Russia remove its nuclear weapons from Kaliningrad, the region of Russia that borders Poland. Pursuant to the modern Monroe Doctrine, we will require that Russia removes its military presence from the Western Hemisphere, where they have it, in Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and otherwise. This is how we secure peace in Ukraine. But this is also how we deter Xi Jinping from going after Taiwan. Because Xi Jinping's bet right now is that the U.S. will not want to go to war with two different allied nuclear superpowers at the same time, in the form of Russia and China. But if Russia's no longer in China's camp, then Xi Jinping is going to have to think twice before going after Taiwan. I want to strengthen our alliance with India, actually. Not just because my name is Vivek Ramaswamy, I promise. And maybe I can do that even more effectively because I'll use every advantage I have. But get India to commit to blocking the Andaman Sea, where the Chinese Middle Eastern oil supplies run through for China to get their oil. And our relations with Japan, South Korea. Or, you know, talk about Second Amendment. I would export the Second Amendment to Taiwan. At least teach them how it's done. Put a gun in every Taiwanese household. Train them how to use it. That's how you keep China at bay. China's deathly afraid of a Second Amendment. Until we get semiconductor independence in this country, it's vital for the U.S. that China not invade or annex Taiwan. And so, it's just a very different view of our foreign policy. And you're right, this has made the establishment in both political parties really lose their mind over my candidacy. And that's okay. I would sooner lose this election, but speak the truth on this every step of the way, than to make convenient compromises that somehow allow us to win through snakes and ladders. There's a guy at the fair earlier today up north where he said I lost his vote over this issue. And he's from Scotland. He's a smart guy. So we, had a 2-minute exchange. But I was really encouraged because then his wife came up afterwards. She said, well, I'm still voting for you. I'm going to try to get him. So I said, that's good. That's nice. that actually made my day. But you know what? Whether or not it's the winning political strategy, I don't know. But I do think that if somebody's been crashing your cars for the last 25 years, you don't want to turn over the key to the same person. Okay, and so I think it is time for a new generation of leadership in this country, a new generation that wants to actually advance American interests without apologizing for who we are, while actually keeping us out of war, rather than leading us into wars. And now we're talking about not small wars in the Middle East, but World War III at stake if China and Russia are on the other side. Without those homeland defense systems, we may take a real risk that the United States, as we know it, ceases to exist until we've fortified our homeland defense systems. So that's the way I'm going to lead as Commander-in-Chief, and I think that I'm the single best positioned candidate in either party to keep us out of war while reducing our economic independence on China and Taiwan. That's how we actually revive American prosperity. And what I'll say in closing is this. I think it might just take somebody whose best days, and I don't take anything for granted, by the way, on this. I want to say this, waking up tomorrow morning will be a gift that God gives us to live every day and have a new purpose. And I don't take tomorrow for granted, but at least I hope and I pray, as somebody who's 38 years old, that my best days may still yet be ahead of me. To see a country whose best days are still yet ahead of itself. See, I don't think we have to be that nation in decline, whether it's relating to social security policy, how we conduct ourselves on the global stage. We don't have to be ancient Rome. We don't have to be that nation in its final stage of decay. I think the truth is, as a nation, we're really just a little young, actually. Not just me, all of us. Going through our own version of adolescence. Figuring out who we're really going to be when we grow up. And when you view it that way, it starts to make sense again, actually. When you go through your adolescence, you go through that identity crisis. You lose your way a little bit. You lose your self-confidence. Probably most of us did. But we don't have to stay that nation in decline. I think the truth is we can still be a nation in our ascent. Maybe the early stages of our ascent. Maybe we're not even yet at base camp. On our way to that mountaintop. Still that shining city on a hill. Still that country where we can look our two sons in the eye and tell them without holding our nose, without wincing, them knowing that we mean it. That this is still the country, the United States of America, where no matter who you are, or where your parents came from, or what your skin color is, or how long your last name is, in my case, that you get ahead in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you know what? You are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is what we are running to. And that is what we will revive to save this great nation. Thank you all for coming. God bless you.
Yes, I think we're on our way out. So hi, good to see you. Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you so much. Good to see you. What's your name? My name is John. I'm from Burlington today. Good to see you, John. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Do you mind if I say one name? Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes.
We're on our way, so we're apparently going to get one. You don't want to picture this? You want to be the best? I'll take it. I want to take it.
That's pretty bad. You could do it.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. We're going to by your boss? By your boss? Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Do you want to get in it? Huh? Do you want to get in it?
I would love to. Thank you. We got to roll.
Hey guys. Oh, that's cool.
Now we need you guys to bring young people out to the primary. That's what we need. That's what we're counting on. Okay, thank you very much. Young people for the primary. That's what we need. Thank you guys. I figured. Yes, sir. Thank you guys. It means a lot.
Vivek Ramaswamy will introduce here very shortly. But again, welcome as active citizens who care about their country, their state, for participating in the New Hampshire primary. We'd like to open up with a prayer and a pledge. Thank you.
God loves New Hampshire, He loves America, and He loves you. Father, I thank you for this amazing opportunity tonight that you've given us to be here in this room. No one is here by accident, but you've prepared us for this moment. Lord, we ask for revival for America. We ask that this great nation that you have entrusted to us, that you would raise up and continue to raise up men and women who would hear the call to fulfill the specific purposes that you have placed on their life. Father, tonight, anoint every ear to hear and every heart to understand. In the precious name of Jesus, amen.
If those who could stand, please do. Remove your hats, and we'll do the pledge. Please join with me.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Okay. Uh-oh, he's back there. Everyone's doing a 360 on me here. By the way, that was Bill Wright, your sheriff, also a Marine veteran. Thank you very much, Bill. So now, while you're all here, Vivek Ramaswamy is running for president of the United States. He's the guy that wants to take the woke out of wokeness. He's the guy that has a very powerful message. He's full of energy, full of excitement. And someone, as you noticed at the presidential debates here just recently, just knocked it out of the park. He is making our party youthful. He's making it where there's conviction, there's truth being said on these very important issues that are affecting all Americans. And we want to hear the truth. We want to hear what it is that's going on in our country and how we can change the course of our country through youthful, dynamic leadership like Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, I have to say, he's had a long day already, but as I've said in Conway, he's got 10 times the amount of energy that I do. And so he was in Hill at the Village Bible Church this morning. Then he went up to Lancaster where he had a large group just came out of nowhere. It just came out of nowhere and gravitated to the back end of the GOP tent, and they listened to him. I still have my little band there from Lancaster Fair. And additionally, he went over to Conway. His crowds, from when I introduced him in April of this year, in a little cafe shop in Littleton, have grown exponentially. Why have they grown exponentially? Because he's enthusiastic, he's got a great message, and more importantly, he's got a great story. He's got a great wife, great kids, very successful entrepreneur, and someone who we are so happy to have in this race. Would you give us a warm welcome for Vivek Ramaswamy and his wife,
It's good to be here, guys. I'm excited to be back. Love my time in New Hampshire. We get to have open conversations here. That's something we don't do in this country anymore. I have become, over the course of this primary process, a first-in-the-nation primary evangelist here in New Hampshire, because I think you all can tell the difference. You have a sixth sense between somebody who comes in here and recites poll-tested platitudes and somebody who actually is sharing his own first personal convictions, okay? And one of the things we need to do to revive this country is take what you will say in private and then start saying it in public. That's how we're going to reunite this country. You want to know the best measure of the health of our American democracy? It is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. Right now, we are doing poorly. The only way we're going to do better is all of us, not just me, all of us starting to talk openly again in this country. I want to tell you a bit about myself and what moved me on this journey. I talked about it at the fair for the first time in a while earlier today. I enjoyed that. My father came to this country in the late 1970s. My mom came in the early 1980s with almost no money in their pocket. In a single generation, I've gone on to found multiple multi-billion-dollar companies. But it didn't happen automatically. We grew up and went through some times of, there were times of hardship that we faced. For example, my dad, he worked for the GE plant in the southwest part of Ohio in the 1990s under Jack Welch's tenure when there were massive layoffs. One day he came back home from work. I remember this. I was going into middle school. And it turned out they said that 2/3 of the people at that plant were going to be laid off. That was a shockwave to our family early on. But you know what he did? He said he found an opportunity where, even though he was an engineer, they had a shortage of patent attorneys at GE. And they figured if he would go to night school for 4 years, that would actually keep his job security. So for 4 years, after a full day at work, we didn't have child care or anything like that. Now, we're blessed. We have both of our parents in this country, both the Purvas and mine, that help us out. But they didn't have any of that. For 4 years, he went to night school, to Northern Kentucky Law School, came back. I sat in the back of the law classes with him, would ride back with him. I went to law school in 6th grade, I joked around. Made it easier the second time around because of that. And I joked around, the way I became a conservative was that he would talk about Clarence Thomas and Antonin Scalia, but he would take the other side. And so those long car rides back as a 12-year-old